the session for that. So my name is Katie Marshall. I'm a member of the Racial Unity Network, and we're really excited to have everyone join us tonight for this Run Recharge. What Run Recharge is within our ministry is that about once a quarter, we either host some type of connection activity together, or maybe some type of speaker to come in and talk about issues around racial justice. So we're excited to have Nan here tonight with us from the PA Innocence Project. So before we get started, something that I think is helpful to do, that we like to do, is that we want to recognize that there might be people that aren't very familiar with Run. So I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen real quick and just share really briefly about what Run is and what we do within Run. Just so that you are all aware. And then we always like to do a quick connection activity after that. So some people know each other, but some people don't. And these events are always an opportunity for us to get to know other people from around the community that also care about these issues. So like I mentioned, we're the Racial Unity Network. Really what we're about is that we want to build relationships with all people so that we can work towards advancing justice and equity because Christ's love compels us. So that's really what drives what we do, and wanting to advance equity and justice within our community. And that plays out in a lot of different ways. And so some of the things that we do within our ministry is try to host educational programs, but we also try to increase inclusion and belonging both within the church and beyond the church walls as well. So that's just a real brief intro about what we do. So what I want to do now is that I want to hand it over to Phil. He's another person on our leadership team, and he's going to run a little connection activity for us. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Phil.
Hi, everyone. My name is Phil Martin. I'm a member of the team that Katie leads, the church transformation team within the Racial Unity Network. For the next 8 minutes, I want to break you guys out into groups of a few, and then introduce yourselves and ask each other these questions. So what has been on your mind related to wrongful incarceration and justice, and what prompted you to attend this program? So again, introduce yourselves and get to know each other and talk about what's been on your mind as it relates to wrongful incarceration and justice, and what prompted you to attend this program today.
Great. So what we're going to do now is that we're going to put folks in breakout rooms for about 6 to 8 minutes or so. When I hit create the rooms, you should see a box pop up, and you can just click on that, and that's going to take you directly to your breakout room. So remember to introduce yourselves to each other when you get started, and then we'll post those questions to have them broadcast through the breakout rooms. So I'm opening the rooms now. Hi, Carol and Megan. I'm going to try to put you two in breakout rooms. I think you might have just joined literally as I was putting people in them. So let me see if I can add you both to the breakout rooms.
Good evening, everybody. So glad that you were able to make it tonight. I hope that you can take this information away with you and share it with others in your network. Tonight, as Katie said, we are pleased and delighted to welcome Nan Failer, who is the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Innocence Project. Nan has more than 25 years of nonprofit and government management and advocacy experience. She actually began working with the Pennsylvania Innocence Project in August of 2019. Prior to her role, she was the Deputy Commissioner for Public Health Programs in the City of Philadelphia's Department of Public Health. Nan has a master's in public health from Columbia University, and she also has a law degree from New York University School of Law. Nan has served on several boards, including the Pennsylvania Prison Society, Nationality Service Center, the Valentine Foundation, Community Legal Services, and Prevention Point, which is Philadelphia's sterile needle exchange program. So she has a wealth of experience when it comes to serving communities. So we want to welcome her and the great work that she's doing. Thank you again for coming, Nan. I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to see you all. I'm really thrilled to have your interest, and hopefully, and I promise you some time to chat. Let me see if I can get my, that's not right. I'm looking for, here it is. Can you see this? Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can see the presentation.
Okay, great. Then we will start.
Is what freedom looks like. The inside of a state correctional institution was John Miller's home for the last 22 years after he was sentenced to life in prison for a murder he did not commit.
I feel good. It's feel amazing, so surreal. Just very happy.
Back in 1998, a jury found Miller guilty of second-degree murder in the shooting death of Anthony Mullen, a parking lot attendant, even though there was no physical evidence of Miller's involvement. Years later, the same man who testified against Miller confessed that he was in fact the shooter and not Miller. Miller is on cloud nine right now.
So when I stepped out the doors, I was just looked up and just was just thankful and blessed that, you know, what God has done for me.
But it was an uphill battle getting to that justice. Miller filed more than 10 appeals, all were denied. But justice was on the horizon for Miller in 2009 after he contacted the Pennsylvania Innocence Project.
Very hard for Hamilton and the Pennsylvania Innocence Project working together, just trying to give John Miller a chance to be heard.
Miller was heard, and now as a free man, he's focusing his attention on fine dining. What are you looking forward to eating first?
Imagine, if you will, that you spent 20 years or more than 20 years in prison for something you didn't do. Think of all the things that you'd missed. From age 20 to 42, I think was, John was 19 actually when he was convicted, and he spent the 22 years in prison. He, like many of the wrongfully convicted, spent his formative years. When you start a family, when you start a career, when you learn a trade, birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, he missed all of them. And so did our other exonerees and the people we represent and people throughout the country who were in jail for something they didn't do. That's another picture of John on the bus ride home, I believe, from leaving prison. This is Crystal Weimer. She's 28 when she was convicted. These are our exonerees. She spent 11 years in prison. I'll talk a little bit more about her later, perhaps. Chester Holman was 21 when convicted. I'll talk about his case a little bit more. He spent 25 years in prison. And Andrew Swainson, who you'll hear from at the end, was 22 when he was convicted for something he did not do and spent 31 years in prison. Let me start a little bit by talking about who we are. So we're the Pennsylvania Innocence Project. We are a small office with a big mission. We have there's 10 of us in 2 offices. We have 3 main parts of our mission. The first is, and the primary one is to work to free and exonerate those convicted of crimes they did not commit in Pennsylvania. I can talk more about the whole system of how we evaluate cases, but we get about 500 letters a year from people who assert their innocence and ask for our help. And if they are in Pennsylvania and have 10 more years left in their sentence, because it takes at least that much to represent somebody and go through the process of fighting their conviction. And if they have assert actual innocence, then we send them a questionnaire and we begin a long process of evaluating both legally and factually their claim, because it's very difficult to prove innocence and it's our burden to prove innocence. As I often say, it's pretty easy and for some people, particularly African-American young men, to get arrested and convicted, but it's very difficult to prove your innocence. The second part of our mission is to advocate for policies to prevent the innocence from being convicted to begin with and provide justice for exonerees. I'll talk more about all these things later. And our third is our reentry program, where we have a social worker that provides services and support to help the wrongly convicted people who are free transition to freedom. It's a hard road. It's very traumatic. 20 years in prison for anyone is very difficult, and then knowing you're innocent. So we'll talk a little bit about that. As I said, we're a small office with a big impact. We have a small office in Pittsburgh, and most of the rest of our staff is Philly, though we work all together as a team. Most of our cases are in Philadelphia, although we have cases in almost every county throughout the state. We're very proud. We celebrated our 20th exoneree in 2020. They're men and women from throughout Pennsylvania. They served an average of 22.5 years in prison for a crime they had nothing to do with. A total of 451 lost years being wrongly incarcerated. As I mentioned, it takes a long time. It takes an average of 10 to 15 years to litigate a case. And the majority of our clients are African-American, primarily African-American men, which reflects the demographics of who's incarcerated in this country. Let me talk a little bit about wrongful convictions, and we'll talk a little bit about identifying the problem, how big the problem is, a couple case studies for you and lessons learned. An exoneration, we use the word a lot, and basically an exoneration occurs when a person who's been convicted of a crime is officially cleared on new evidence of innocence. So there's a couple important things of that. The person in that definition, the person has to be officially cleared. So a judge has to ultimately make a ruling. And it's our burden, as I said, to show new evidence to prove innocence. It's very difficult to get into court. We have one case right now, we've spent 6 years just trying to get into court. Every step of the way, we've been denied. There's very strict rules. The Pennsylvania PCRA, Conviction Relief Act, is one of the stringent, most challenging in the country. And it keeps a lot of people from getting into court. And you have to make an assertion within 1 year of your conviction. There's a lot of obstacles that we fight in court all the time. So we have the burden. We need to show both new evidence, and it needs to be procedurally possible. This is actually as of 9/15, I just updated this slide. There's been 2,858 exonerations in the United States since they were first, this project, the National Registry of Exonerations, began. And you can see in these, I think some of these slides were sent out ahead of time. If not, I'm happy to share them or have you share them. But you'll see here that the majority of cases are homicide cases. I think almost all of our cases are homicide, and these are people who are spending life in prison without the chance of parole, which is also another thing that not every state has. But we lock people up without the chance of ever getting out. They can't even go to the parole board to seek permission to get out. And that's the fate of most of the people we represent. There's other child sex abuse cases, sexual assault, drug cases, though I don't know that we have any. And then all crimes is the blue is the blue title, I mean, the blue line. A lot of people know about DNA cases, or that gets the news a lot, and it's kind of the gold standard of proof of innocence, but it's a very small percentage. Can you see my, okay, so you can see that the DNA cases, this is as of 6/2/21. These are all the DNA cases, pretty level. And these are all the non-DNA cases, the red. So we have a few DNA cases that have exonerated folks, in fact, or that were in the process of trying to get DNA testing, which is very expensive and is often objected to, which I frankly don't understand actually why the government would not want DNA testing. You'd think that they would want to know if they got the right guy, but it's a struggle to get DNA permission to enter it into the case. Other reasons for wrongful convictions, unfortunately, bad police work or corruption is a pretty pervasive problem, and I'll share a couple cases to demonstrate that. Also, people sometimes make false confessions that are sometimes coerced. You might be familiar with the 5 young men who now are older men from in Central Park from that case. They were juveniles at the time, and they all falsely confessed to a crime. And that's kind of a well-known case. Bad science is another case, bad forensic science. I'll talk about a case where that was a problem. So there's a variety of reasons that contribute to really the breakdown of the criminal justice system, right? Because the wrong person is in jail. You'll see, as I said, the gold standard, just to give you some perspective, 40 out of the 356 wrongful convictions where there was a false, someone pled guilty, 40 of them, DNA exonerated them. 71% of cases of convictions, where DNA exonerated or proved the person's innocence, involved eyewitness misidentification, with 32% multiple misidentifications. 45%, again, where DNA evidence proved innocence, involved the misapplication of forensic science. 28% of people, there were false confessions, and 16% involved informants. These are people, we've had many situations where sometimes men or people in jail or made deals if they testify against someone. And in 155 cases, fortunately, the true suspects and perpetrators were identified. And they had actually been convicted for 150 additional violent crimes. So it's really in society's interest to get it right, not only to the individual. The culture of incarceration in this country, as I'm sure you know, is out of control. I think it's fair to say. You'll see we incarcerate more people per 100,000 than any of the countries listed on that chart. It's also been a 500% increase in the number of people incarcerated in the last 40 years. And it hasn't changed the crime rates. It's really because of changes in attitude and law and policy and war on drugs and other things that have resulted in mass incarceration. Within that, there's tremendous racial inequity. 1 in every 10 Black men in his 30s is in prison or jail at any given time. The lifetime likelihood of imprisonment for US residents is here by race and gender. You can see for all men, it's 1 in 9, but for Black men, 1 in 3 has a likelihood of imprisonment. Latino men, 1 in 6. For women, it's 1 in 56 for all women, but really the extent of racial inequity and really, I think there's a presumption in our system that a Black man did it. I think really when you think about how people could be wrongly convicted, to look at that as sort of a lens or a mirror on the criminal justice system. It's really a runaway train that they just, in the United States, we interrogate, detectives interrogate really to prove the person did it. And they can lie, and they can say there's DNA evidence when there isn't. They can say there's video when there isn't. They can say other people implicated you when they didn't. There's no constitutional or legal limit to what detectives can say to try to get a confession or to pull together evidence. And it's interesting, Europe has a whole different way, there's really reformed the interrogation system. They call it an interview, and they're not allowed to trick the person or give them wrong evidence. Instead, they are really intending to just find out who did it. So I think that some of the presumptions and the racism in the system contributes to these staggering statistics. Unfortunately, race influences wrongful convictions as well. Innocent Black people are more likely to be wrongly convicted of crimes than innocent white people. 7 times more likely for murder, 3.5 times more likely for sexual assault, and it goes up higher if the victim is white, and 12 times more for a drug crime. This is another way to look at it. You can see the race of exonerees. Blacks are 13% of the population and 49% of our exonerees. So the racial crisis in the criminal justice system impacts wrongfully convicted as well. In fact, on average, Black murder exonerees, they're not only more likely to be convicted, but they spend more time in prison before release than white. African-American sexual assault exonerees spent 4.5 years longer in prison than white. And overall it's 3 years. So I know this is part of your mission, is to really try to unravel and unpack and change the system that can really be racially unfair. And there's a lot of work to be done. Let me talk a little bit about some cases that I thought might be of interest. You know, we don't have an exoneree with us tonight, so I wanted to sort of introduce you to some of the people we work with. Sean Thomas, who actually facilitates our support group, was wrongly convicted for 20 years. I mean, he was wrongly incarcerated for 20 years. He spent 24 years in prison and basically I'm going to summarize so we have enough time, but once the case was on appeal, Philadelphia's District Attorney's Conviction Review Unit, which is a unit that we can talk more about that are beginning to happen in district attorneys around the country, where they're reviewing cases of potential wrongful conviction, and they really are looking at undoing some of the harm, and we work with them a lot. Many of our cases are before the Conviction Review or Integrity Unit. And they found 36 pages of undisclosed witness statements pointing to other suspects that were never presented to the original prosecutors or the defense attorneys. Within days, his conviction was vacated. And he had an alibi that day. He was at Youth Study Center, actually, had gotten in trouble with, I think, stealing a bike or something. And that was never introduced to trial. And his mother and sister, who could have testified, were never invited to testify. And the detective on this case, Detective Devlin, is a sort of notorious Philadelphia detective that's involved in 3 other innocent cases. That unfortunately, we see patterns like that. Here's Sean.
But I do remember what he told me when he first took my case. He said,
sorry, my introduction of this, I missed, is that this is Sean Thomas talking about when he learned from his lawyer that he was going to be released.
In this case, I found out that you lied to me. He said, I'm gonna drop your case. I said, well, just grab a seat, just listen to my story. I ain't gonna lie to you. I'm gonna tell you the truth. And, to this day, that's like my best friend, my mentor, my big brother. So when he called me and he told me the good news, I know forget. It was on Mother's Day weekend, that Friday, I know forget. He was like, well, you'll be home Tuesday. He asking for immediate release. I was like, yeah. He's like, why you don't sound happy? I said, I believe it when I see you on the other side of that gate. And they pushing me down the aisle to come home. So after I got off the phone with him, they called me to the council office. It was like, pack your stuff. And my mind is running. I'm like, whoa, I didn't show nobody. I didn't call nobody. I'm still like, I'm stuck. I'm stuck. Like, is it really gonna happen? I'm saying to myself, I'm gonna get to see my mom. I ain't got to hug my mom in the visiting room no more. I get to finally see my little brother play basketball. I get to go to my grandfather's gravesite and let them know that I'm here. I made it. I made it after all these years. It was a lot. It was a lot. That weekend, that weekend is a weekend I never forget. I never forget. Walking down the doors. Ooh, that was a weekend. But
Terry Smallwood was in prison for 42 years. She was 20 at the time of the conviction. She was a college student with no criminal record. She was convicted of murder and arson for a fire that happened in a building across the street from her that had her, where her boyfriend and a woman he was with died. There was no forensic evidence linking her. And the tragedy of this case, among others, is that it turns out it wasn't an arson. It wasn't even a crime. So Terry spent 42 years in prison for something that wasn't even a crime. Chester Holman, who's on our board, was in prison for 25 years and was convicted at age 21. He's an amazing man. If you've seen the Innocence Files on HBO, if you haven't, I strongly recommend it. And if you have, he's episode 7. And we also have actually on our website a panel we did with Chester and his volunteer attorney that works in collaboration with us and the director of the film talking about it. Just very briefly, he was arrested for driving. He was driving, a man got killed, and witnesses saw driving off a white Chevy Blazer with a couple letters YZA and the license plate. And Chester happened to come across the scene, and he was in a rented Chevrolet Blazer with a license plate with the letters YZA. The cops searched the vehicle. They found no weapon. He was wearing green pants, and the witnesses said they saw somebody with red and blue, 2 men, one wearing red, one wearing blue. Ultimately, they took him to the station, and the woman he was with, a friend of his, ended up saying, wrongly accusing him of doing it, Deidre Jones, several years later, and he was convicted. Even though there was no real evidence, and the witnesses had seen other things. He had a steady job working for an armored car company and was going to college. But Jones gave a statement that she was in the getaway car. In 2001, there was a homeless man who was on drugs who said he saw Chester, and he recanted his testimony in 2001. And then 2005, Deirdre Jones recanted, saying she gave false testimony because police had refused to request for a lawyer and threatened to charge her with a crime. So there was also substantial evidence about the actual perpetrators' criminal record, and indications that the police didn't turn over a lot of evidence. Our investigator found that there were 5 identical white SUVs with a license plate YZA that were rented that night. But it wasn't until we looked into it years later that we even found that. So we'll talk about these folks and more if you'd like. But I want to just finish up by talking about a couple more things we do. We work on policy efforts to prevent wrongful convictions. For example, mandatory videotaping of interrogations that may hopefully prevent wrongful convictions, because the police would be videotaped. Other things are like an open file so that we have discovery access to the police and the prosecutor's files. The PCRA law being amended, as I mentioned. So there's a bunch of things we don't have any policy staff. I do it with our legal director and the Innocence Network staff. So it's right now a little hard to get a lot done, but it's part of our mission and we're working hard on it. The last thing I want to talk about is that we do reentry services. And I thought it might be interesting to hear from Andrew Swainson about his transition from prison.
It goes on for me. I've been home for 6 months, but I'm still traumatized. I'm taking it one day at a time. There are so much emotions that bottled up, and trying to express the emotions is difficult. But you got to understand, you must take it one day at a time. Because if you don't, then you may go insane. Even though I am free, a part of me is still incarcerated. One of my biggest fear coming home was that when I go to sleep, I would dream of being in the prison population, walking the yard, talking to guys, doing prison things. This is something that constantly plays with my mind. So I do get sleeps, but I get like nap sleeps. I sleep for maybe 2 hours and then I'm up. And then I go back again and I may get a half an hour and I'm up. I'm not really sleeping like a normal person should have. Maybe society, people has the same effect, but for me personally, it is.
One of the issues that our services are, our reentry services includes a social worker. We provide case management. We have a peer support group, and we provide services to help people in that difficult transition. One thing to know is that we're one of only 14 states that provides no compensation or services to the wrongfully convicted when released. In Pennsylvania, people leave with just the shirt on their back. So that's, a campaign that we're working with other groups to try to change. Even many red states have enacted laws to pay about $70,000 a year for all the years that a person was obligated. And we feel was wrongly incarcerated. And we feel like the government in Pennsylvania should do that too. So to finish up, maybe you know the answer to this, or we could talk about it. Why do wrongful convictions matter? Well, it's certainly an injustice to individuals. You've seen that tonight. It also undermines community faith in the criminal legal system. It really shows the need for reform. As I said earlier, it's a complete breakdown. It's a complete breakdown. The wrong person's in prison and the real perpetrator's gotten away. So it puts communities at risk. And the original victim of the crime really never receives justice and closure. If you haven't read the book Picking Cotton, you may want to. It's a woman who was brutally raped and identified a man and what sort of hated him in her mind for years and years. And he was incarcerated for many years. And then DNA proved he couldn't have done it. And it's their road. And now they work together, speaking all over the country about the need for reform. Their relationship is really very solid, very tight. They're part of each other's families now. And it's a very powerful book. It's called Picking Cotton. So this is the question everybody asks, and you're probably, it's a hard question to answer, but what can you do? The first is to spread the word. You can follow us on social media, subscribe to our emails by going to our Take Action on our website. And we're a small organization that relies on donations, so we would certainly appreciate any support. You can donate via our website. And the other thing is exonerees. We're working on an emergency fund for exonerees or gift cards for exonerees. I know people want more on-hands experience sometimes, but it's very difficult for there really aren't very many opportunities. If you're not a lawyer. If you're a lawyer, we use volunteer lawyers on all of our cases to help, and law students. But beyond legal volunteers, we don't have any opportunity for volunteers, but we are interested in creating an emergency fund for exonerees. And we can talk about other ideas you might have. Let me close by hearing Sean again.
Everybody asked me a question from the time that I was released to the day. The number one question, you're not angry, you're not upset. No, I'm not angry, I'm not upset. What for? Everything I learned, I had patience, I had faith. As long as I stay positive, no matter what, I'm always one. They want me to be angry. They want me to be angry. They want me to hate people. They want me to hate this, hate that. No, I'm gonna love myself no matter what. And that's what I continue to do. Love myself and love people that are around me. And the people that's around me support me as well as I support them. The energy that they give me, I give them. I want to teach people as well as learn, so this never happens to another person again. I wouldn't want to see nobody spend 24 years of a good life behind bars for something that they didn't do. I'm glad that we got the Innocence Project. I'm glad we got people like David Dawson, Paul Messenger, Steve Brown, James Pazorski. I'm glad we got all those people that fight for us when we can't fight for ourselves, to help us so that we can prove our innocence.
Thanks very much. That's the end of my slideshow.
Wow. Thank you, Nan, for such a comprehensive presentation. That was a lot to take in.
Yeah.
And we condensed it, folks. We actually condensed the content. So we're going to start with question and answers. And for those who haven't used Zoom, which most of you probably have, please use your raised hand feature in the right or in the central part of your screen under reactions. There is a raised hand button. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and I will acknowledge you for Nan to answer your question. So right now the floor is open for questions. We'll give time for folks to find their raised hand feature. While people are pondering, I have a question, Nan. You kind of started out talking about the number of cases that you get every year. And so how do you go about the process of determining which cases to take?
Thank you for that question. We have a 4-stage review. The first is, as I said, we send a questionnaire out to people who meet our basic eligibility. And they're all incarcerated, and so we send it to them in prison, and they send it back with any legal documents they have for their case. That's called a stage 2 review, and law students and our staff review that, and sometimes volunteer attorneys. If at that point there's any indication that this might be a wrongful conviction, then it goes to the next stage of review based on the legal team's analysis. At that stage, stage 3, it's a much more intensive review. It can, we end up with case summaries that can be 7,500 pages. It's looking at every single paper we can get completely related, any paper, any legal documents, any of the cases or the appeals, if we can get copies of the criminal records, the police records and the DA's records. At that point, then we, for cases that continue at that level, which is many of them, we have an investigator that actually investigates. We'll reenact the crime scene, interview witnesses. A lot of witnesses recant when we finally get to them, as they did in Chester's case. And then we have a process with external experts, including prosecutors, to help us decide at the end of the day, if all of that indicates actual innocence and we have evidence that we can prove it, then we represent the person.
Good to know. Thank you for that. Dan has a question.
Yeah, Nana, thank you for your presentation. It was great. I'm just curious, in our small group, right before you started, we were just talking about how a lot of the information about cases like this just fly under the radar, and that the average person probably isn't even aware that these kinds of injustices are going on. And you mentioned the book Picking Cotton, and I'm just curious, are there any other, like, I don't know, books or films or other things that you would recommend to help us more fully understand the issues?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do think watching the Innocence Files, the HBO series, is really excellent. I think there are two movies or films about the Central Park case that is really just staggering. I think there's and then there are other books. I think this is really Just Mercy. If you haven't read that, you probably have, but he deals with a lot of issues, including false convictions. It's interesting. From our perspective, there's a lot more discussion about this because there's all the true crime shows, and there's sort of different. So we've seen more people that want to get involved that are not well informed, to be honest with you. And so we're trying to figure out how to educate folks more with our limited staff. We'd love to do more of that. This is an example of, sort of trying to get the word out. I can think more about it. I think that those are good places to start in terms of books and resources. The other thing is, on our website, we have a couple panels that we've done. There's 3, I think, recently that I think are really interesting, talking about wrongful convictions, and they involve actual cases, most of them. So that's also something you may want to watch.
They're great. Thank you.
Thank you, Nan. Georgianne has a question.
So you mentioned wanting to educate people more. So what are some of the misconceptions that people have about this issue?
That's a great question. I should probably ask you that because I'm so close to it. I think that there are some people I've heard that don't believe people are really innocent. And I think there could be that cynicism. I have to say, I'm not sure it's misconceptions as much as Dan said, that there's a lack of awareness and lack of understanding and sort of a feeling of powerlessness. I also think it's really hard to face the breakdown of this system. It's really hard to look at the lack of accountability. I mean, district attorneys and cops have immunity. And we'd like to change that, not just to punish people, but as a deterrent, and have more transparency of criminal records. George Floyd's, the policeman who murdered George Floyd, had something like 30 complaints against him or something. And there's a lot of reform that's needed. And I think it's challenging because we hold these institutions and need them and respect them and want to respect them. And I still respect them, but it's trying to figure out how we can, I think, turn our focus a little bit towards reform.
Thank you. And forgive me if I pronounce your name wrong. Is it Kamisi?
Hi, it's Camise. I just want to say thank you for being here. This is a topic that I'm very committed and dedicated to, and I'm glad that you're presenting on this, because I don't think a lot of people realize that how many people are innocent that are behind bars and wrongfully convicted. But I have 2 questions. So when you say there's no compensation for them, can they sue civilly? And then also, when you guys are pushing back against this, what are they saying? Like, what are the reasons why people cannot be compensated when they're incarcerated for all those years for something that they didn't do?
Well, those are two excellent questions. Are you in college by chance?
Yes, I'm a student, but I'm also a member of the PA Prison Society as
Oh,
well.
good. I was on the board for many years. I only ask because except if COVID ever ends, we use law students and college students as volunteers. So, and you have to live in Philly unless we continue doing everything remotely. I guess it's the positive downside or positive upside of Zoom. And your first question, remind me again, I'm so busy trying to talk to you about you working for us, I forget your first question.
That's okay. So I asked, like, because there's no compensation, can they sue civilly? And then
Right.
also, like, what is the feedback
Right.
that you're getting whenever you guys
Right.
are pushing back against, there not being no compensation?
Right. So yes, they can sue civilly. It's very difficult. It can be traumatic, but it's also a small percentage of people who win. But there are certainly cases you'll read about. I think Chester Holman got $59 million, or I'm terrible with numbers. I tend to double them. So perhaps it was 25 million, a lot of money. I was talking to a social worker about this today, and it doesn't change a lot. I mean, it makes life much, much easier, and they can pay for therapy and other things, but it's interesting. In any case, we do have clients who have had a settlement. We don't do anything it's a conflict for us, so we just refer them out. We have nothing to do with the cases. But it isn't really an answer because there's not that many opportunities. The laws in every state would say if you do sue civilly and get a settlement, your payment from the government is offset by that amount. So we can say to legislators, there's no double dipping. The legislators pushing back primarily say there's no money. It's not a lot of money in the big picture. But I think we're going to get there in Pennsylvania. We're doing lobby days with exonerees, but I think it's going to take a while because there is, it tends to be, I don't mean to be too partisan, but Harrisburg is not that open to spending money on vulnerable folks historically. And so, although they've been doing a lot of good criminal justice reform, so we're hopeful.
Thank you, Camise, for your question. And Michelle.
Hi, yes, Michelle Niedermeyer. Hi, Nan. Thank you so much for all of this. I'm in Philadelphia, and so it's good to see you. With your limited staff and funding, are there, other groups across Pennsylvania or other groups across the nation, I would assume, working similarly? And if so, are there ways to kind of compound the effort and help each other out? Are there other partners or stakeholders that could be involved? Social services and those sorts of folks that could, help with all of this, because obviously it's a heavy lift.
Sure, there's an Innocence Project in, I think, for almost every state. And we are joined together in something called the Innocence Network, which is really just a membership organization, but we share information. One of our legal attorneys on the board, they provide a lot of technical assistance. In fact, I called them to say, everyone wants to volunteer, what do you say? And she said, it's a very painful conversation, but all the Innocence projects are in the same boat. It's very difficult to accommodate non-legal volunteers. So I go to them when I have questions. We do have strong relationships, particularly in our reentry with social services providers, where we need more help. And we have a new social worker who's going to work on for people who aren't exonerated in Philadelphia. I mean, we could always, I'm sure, find more resources, but I feel like we're pretty set in Philadelphia. We have a certain number in Pittsburgh, Harrisburg, then some other counties. And I think it's harder to find resources there for the trauma of the reentry. It's really I can't, some people think it's as traumatic as being in prison for 20 years. I can't really say that, but the trauma of reentry is really staggering. It's just really, and among other things, people don't have much notice. As Sean said, it's all of a sudden you're going to get out after hoping and praying for it for all those years. What's amazing to me is that of our 20 exonerees, they aren't bitter. They're really lovely. As Sean said in his tape, it's sort of hard for me as a person who hasn't the same lived experience to wonder. They say they can't afford to be bitter, but also that they've really resolved the injustice and a lot of them want to work on preventing it from happening again.
Thank you for that question, Michelle. Other questions? Well, Nan, I did have a question, and I know it's going to sound like a silly one, but in all your efforts, especially around the changes in interrogation and police detective work and even policy changes, have you had departments try to work alongside with you to help make change, as well as lawmakers?
I'm sorry, have who work alongside of us?
Have you had police departments or lawmakers try to work alongside with you to help make change?
Well, certainly lawmakers. Yes. And there are in other, I think we're at an earlier stage on that, but I think that for example, videotaping of interrogations, we're working with the Association of District Attorneys, who I hopefully will be on board. And we will definitely meet all the police chiefs associations and the police. At this point, we haven't had gotten to that stage, but we absolutely will try to partner with them on all of our work. And also talking to folks, police chiefs and others from other states. Videotaping, for example, there was a lot of pushback about videotaping arrests. And now everybody, I mean, it's the norm now, and police are grateful for it. And so a lot of it is changing the culture. And cops and the police in other jurisdictions where they do videotape are very pleased that they do. And it means if somebody confesses, you have a proof, that it wasn't coerced. So it can be really better for everyone. But yeah, it's important to get partners from across the aisle and from, departments that would be most impacted.
Good to know some collaboration is going on.
Absolutely.
Janet has a question.
Hi, thank you. And thanks for this presentation and this dialogue. I really appreciate it. And this is kind of a wonky policy question, so please don't go into too much detail. But
okay,
just on the surface, is it the Post-Conviction Relief Act that is the problem? And can you just say, why is it like one of the worst in the country? What makes it so hard to get over as a barrier?
Well, there's a lot of issues that I don't litigate cases. I'm an attorney. I started as a public defender and ran the AIDS Law Project and did a lot of civil rights work in my career. But running the organization, I don't have the capacity to do cases. So I'm not an expert on the PCRA. I know one barrier is that you have to bring evidence of proof of new evidence within a year. Well, you're sentenced to life in prison and you're 21 years old. There are some exceptions, and we've litigated some of those. For example, if you were incarcerated, there's now a Supreme Court decision that sort of says the clock can stop because you wouldn't have any way to know. So, for example, in an arson case, if there's new articles about science, fire science technology or whatever, you wouldn't know that if you're incarcerated. So it's things like that. If you're interested, our legal director has written some stuff on it, but it used to be, I think, 3 months or 6 months that you had to show evidence. So we were able to change it to a year. But it's just really like Rusty Brenziger is 6 years just trying to get into court.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
These are great questions. I'm so appreciative of your interest.
They are great questions. Oh, Christina?
I was curious, Nan, what led you to get into this work initially? And how do you kind of sustain your longevity on these cases that take years? Like, how do you refresh yourself and keep yourself in it? And what led you to it initially?
Thanks. As I said, I started as a public defender, and I've always, in all of my work, been involved with criminal justice reform, been on boards like the Pennsylvania Prison Society, and really saw this as an opportunity. And I have the most experience I've had is running nonprofits. So I saw this as a really opportunity for me to, what I really like to do is build and grow organizations. And that's really our vision, is to try to, I mean, it breaks everyone's heart that someone's spending another day in prison. I think how we cope with it, I think we try not to say that. We try, it's like, we know, I mean, the staff is like, they don't exactly compartmentalize, but they're very, very busy, always moving forward. So we try not to focus on the people we're not reaching, I guess. We're doing a strategic plan right now, and what we really need is more attorneys and investigators. And we're hiring a development director to try to do that. Most of our funding is individual donors. Foundations have not been as interested, although some are. And we're in the same boat of every Innocence Project pretty much around the country. I mean, and every nonprofit I've run, it's raising money is the biggest challenge. But I think we really focus on, the hearings. We're having a hearing Friday on a case that, about an evidentiary hearing that we're optimistic about. And we, have this one exoneree. We're hoping an exoneree as soon as the judge makes a ruling, because the district attorney has chosen to vacate the conviction and doesn't want it to go forward. So you just keep your eye on the prize, I guess.
Thank you for your question, Christina. Okay, Camille has a question.
Hi, and so I have another question. So whenever the cases, when they find out and realize that they're innocent and they're released, is there any accountability for, like, for example, like the DA's office or these police officers that are doing whatever doing whatever they're trying to do to get a conviction? So that means, like, getting confidential informants, or I don't know the language that I'm trying to use, but do you know what I mean? Like, is there any accountability for, like, why these people are wrongfully convicted, because they're part of the process for why they're in prison for something that they didn't do?
It's an excellent question. Many people ask, and right now there's very little accountability, because most states have statutes that immunize or keep our public servants from being liable. There's some exceptions, but basically that's a movement that people are really looking at. It is going to change more and more of these cases and more of the evidence. I think for me, as I said earlier, I think it's really important, not only for a lot of reasons, and I think it restores people's faith in the system if there's accountability, but also, as I said earlier, I think we really want a deterrent. We really want the light of day on this practice. The other trend that's encouraging, though, is that, as I said, the conviction integrity units or conviction review units, ours is very active in Philly. There is, I think the AG's office has one, there might be another in another county, but they're really opening the files, and they're really looking at the Chester's case. They went to the judge as they looked at all the evidence and said, we're vacating this conviction, this man is innocent. Sean's case also, many of our cases where the conviction integrity unit has really, because they have access to the police files usually, and the prosecutor's file. So that's a real interesting trend. It doesn't prevent the next wrongful conviction, but it really makes a difference in terms of the government really being willing to look at their own work and really make people free who should be free.
Thank you for that question, Camise. And our hope is that if you see a trend going on with particular officers, that hopefully investigated and held accountable in some form or fashion. So
actually, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it did remind me the Philadelphia District Attorney is suing or bringing charges, I think suing 3 of the detectives that have been on many cases. And it's a first case of its kind, one of the first in the country. So we'll see what happens with that.
well, that's good. That's good news to hear.
Yep.
Nan, do you have any parting information that you want to share with us, or you want to repeat how people can help?
Well, I would encourage you to go to our website and learn more. I really appreciate your interest. And I think if you're interested in this idea, I know that when we've talked earlier, people are interested in helping exonerees. And I think we do give a little bit of money to an exoneree when they first come home, and then we help them get benefits, but they have nothing, most of them. And it's really challenging to be, how do you pay rent? And they have a lot of family support, although as you can imagine, they're 40, 45 years old. They don't want to live with their parents necessarily, and there's sometimes conflict. So an emergency fund we may be setting up, and I can let you know if we sort of have a campaign for that. And that would all be earmarked and go to exonerees. But mostly I think we have to stay educated and be creative and work on racial justice at the same time that you're working on. And I just really think it's great that you're interested.
Well, Nan, we want to thank you for all of this great information, and thank you for your laboring in this effort and on behalf of people's lives, not just the individual exonerees, but the families and friends that are impacted as well. Everyone on the call should have received the presentation in advance. If you have not, please contact Run and we will send it to you, but we ask that you just share this with your network. So thank you again, Nan, and I'm going to turn it back over to Katie.
Wonderful. Yeah, thanks so much, Nan. We really appreciate the time that you took with us tonight. We're going to wrap up real soon. I just want to again share a slide about some upcoming events through the rest of the month that we know going on in the community. And then if anybody else knows of any events that are going on that they want to share out in this time, we'll do that. And then we'll end with a brief wrap-up activity. So let me go ahead and share my screen again. So as you can see here, there are 3 different upcoming events in the community. Some are virtual opportunities and some are in person. You may or may not have heard about these. But tomorrow night, we have Sonia Manzano that's going to be presenting to the Penn State community and beyond for Hispanic Heritage Month. She's going to be talking about how to talk to kids about race and racism. Some of you may recognize her name. She was Maria on Sesame Street. So she has a lot of insight and good experience. So it should be a really great program. So you can register for that online on PSU's website. On the 21st, so next Tuesday at 4 p.m., Carol Anderson is actually going to be in town in State College. She has a new book out called One Person, One Vote. She also was the writer of White Rage. She's going to be presenting around voting rights and also voter suppression. That's offered both virtually and in person. So you can go to statetheater.org and look at those different options. If you do want to register virtually, I think you still, or attend virtually, you still need to register. And then a few days before, they'll send you the link to attend. And then on the 27th, there's a talk around critical race theory. So it's hosted by Strategies for Justice. So some of you may be familiar with Terry Watson and his organization, Strategies for Justice. he'll be having a conversation with Dr. Dwayne Wright. So you can go to strategiesforjustice.com to register for that, and that's a virtual option. Does anybody else know of other events going on that they want to briefly share about for the good of the order for the folks on the call? All right, if you do, then feel free to hop in and share what those are. I also want to encourage everyone to connect with Run. So if this is the first time that you've joined an event with us, if you're interested in being on our listserv or continuing to hear about events or other opportunities to be involved or different things going on in the community, I would encourage you to either go to our website and check out what we do and what we're about. We have lots of resources on there, but you can also sign up for our listserv at racialunitynetwork.com. And then you can also follow us on Facebook if you are a Facebooker at Racial Unity Network. So with that, what I always like to do at the end of these programs is just to take a moment and really think about the information that you heard this evening, and thinking about, bringing to mind things that have been on your mind already, thinking about what prompted you to even attend this event in the first place tonight. And really just sit with that for a moment. I think sometimes, we like hop on and off meetings and then we like go to the next thing or hop off and, need to go eat dinner. And I totally understand that. But I think it's helpful to take a moment and pause and digest the information a little bit and really think about what it means to you and what's one next step for you. So just to really make it concrete, I know that this is a systemic issue and there's a lot of work to be done. And we can't all do it in one day, but we can do something, and we can make small choices and continue to move forward and take small actions. So I just want to take a moment, and I encourage you to either grab a sheet of paper and a pen if that's how you like to brainstorm things, or maybe pull out your phone if that's how you want to do it, or just sit for a moment and just reflect. And I want you to think about what's maybe one next step. Like as you think of what really resonated with you from this program tonight, what's one tangible next thing that you can do in the next 24 hours around this? So maybe it's checking out the website, the PA Innocence Project website. Maybe it's watching one of those videos that was mentioned today, or going and buying one of those books that was mentioned. Maybe it's actually doing a little bit of self-care, because this is a heavy topic that impacts a lot of people. And so maybe you just need to take care of yourself a little bit tonight. And I want to encourage you to do that. Maybe it's just learning more about one of these topics, or looking up something more that really sort of piqued your interest. And so whatever it is, again, we'll make lots of choices in the future, but maybe for now, just pick one thing, one tangible thing that you feel like, okay, over the next 24 hours, I can make a choice to take one next step in whatever that looks like.
Could you repeat the website, either Nan or Katie?
It's painnocence.org.
Okay. Just want to make sure I had it right.
Yeah. You can also put our name in Google. And I should say we're the Pennsylvania Innocence Project. There's an Innocence Project in New York City that we work with very closely, but that's kind of a national group. We're the Pennsylvania Innocence Project.
Okay.
Thanks for clarifying that if people Google it. So again, just choose one next thing, one next step to take in regards to this. And I want to wrap up with that. So you have one next action for you over the next 24 hours. And we'll stick on for a few minutes. Nan can stick on a little bit too, just in case anybody else has any additional questions that they didn't want to ask during the presentation, and we'll stop the recording. But we just want to thank everyone so much for joining us this evening, and Nan, for you presenting for us. You're doing really good work, and we really appreciate it and want to support you. So thank you. Have a good night all.